Welcome to High Stakes. Our today's guest is Claudio Fuentes, a COO and co-founder at CompAI. Claudio, welcome.
Thanks, Abby.
It's so good to have you here today. Tell us a bit about CompAI.
Sure thing. Yeah, so CompAI is a platform that's basically automating the process for what it takes to become SOC 2, ISO, GDPR, and HIPAA compliant, which for the most part, startups need to have access to larger deals with enterprises that usually check like, hey, are you actually secure? And we need some sort of, validation that we can actually trust you with our data. So historically, that process has actually taken a lot of human hours. Like if you talk to some teams, upwards of hundreds of hours of teams basically doing manual paperwork and manual evidence gathering. So CompAI really comes in and automates most of that process. So we cut down the time from hundreds of hours to only 5 or 6 hours to get you essentially compliant or audit ready, depending on the framework.
I wonder, how is the space looking like right now? I know that there's Strata out there, there's Vanta, there used to be Delph. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I would say the space is definitely, it's an existing market, right? So when we started the company, we didn't come out and try to invent something new. We just came into looking at a place that had been around for frankly decades. And initially, the problem was solved by spreadsheets and auditors that were basically doing all the work by hand. Eventually, there was a new wave of software, roughly around I would say like 7 or 8 years ago. So these companies are basically Vanta, Drata, and they came in and created basically like a web version of the spreadsheet, right? And they simplify a little bit of the process of organizing all that information and give you a nicer UI but that's basically fundamentally still operated by humans that are doing the work. So fast forward to 2026, and we are now looking at a completely new landscape where there's a new generation of companies that are coming into the space and are automating as much as they possibly can with LLMs and with AI to basically take away all the previous services that were done by humans, even though they were doing this pretty interface. Now that part of the work is basically almost fully automated by AI. So we come in at the frontier of this new generation of companies. So I would say the landscape is still early and it's still evolving, but we've been fortunate enough to position ourselves as one of the leading players within the AI sort of like generation of companies in this space.
I also know that you decided to make your product open source, which when I heard about it, I was initially surprised. Can you tell us more about this? How did you come up with that decision? What was the thinking process there? What are the benefits of it as well?
Yeah, I would say like this is kind of a funny story because I wish I could claim that we had like a big insight and we were like, oh, we're going to make this open source and that's going to be a great strategic advantage. But frankly, I think this was a decision that was made by one of my co-founders, Lewis, where at the very early stages of the product development, we were basically started working on the platform and we pushed all the code up to GitHub. And we had this moment where we basically were creating the repo and, you have to select, is this a public or private repository? And the story goes is basically, I think we just wanted to piss off Vanta and we thought like, it'll be really funny if you made it public. So we made it public and next thing you know, we're open source. So long story short, that's kind of how it started. So there was no major kind of like strategic thought there or insight, but it turned out to be a great decision in retrospect. So we now been in operation for roughly around 14, 15 months, which we could talk about some of the frankly explosive growth, some of the exciting stuff that's happened to us in that short period of time. But effectively, looking back at the fact that we're open source, it's enabled us to be able to position ourselves as we are the transparent alternative to all these other companies who are basically not telling you and how their process works. Not just that, but you can actually verify that everything we claim from the AI perspective is true. So if anyone has a question around, hey, can your product do this? Or can you prove to me that you actually automate all these things? Most companies basically just hand wave and they show you maybe some pretty screenshots of some mockups. We don't have to do that. We can point you to the open source repository and say, go take a look for yourself. So that turned out to be a really good advantage that I think, frankly, no one in the space really has to the degree that we have. That's enabled us to kind of break into the space much faster and win deals that otherwise, perhaps for being a small player, we wouldn't have been able to build the credibility and the trust to get into those deals. So it turned out to be a great decision, but I would say it was a total accident / joke that kind of got us in that direction in the first place.
I wonder, do clients actually do that, or is it just enough for them that it's transparent, so they trust you and they don't necessarily query it?
I don't think they really look into it too deeply. Some of them do, and some of them actually fix their own bugs, which is actually an
Really?
interesting side effect. Where if they run into something and they're technical, they can actually go in and well nowadays you can just ask Claude Code to fix the thing that's pissing you off. So they're more than welcome to contribute and basically make the platform better for themselves and for everyone else in the process. I would say the vast majority of people that actually don't they don't poke around, but the fact that they know that they could builds a lot of trust. So we're basically saying we're an open book. Come take a look if you want to. And that's usually enough to say like, okay, I trust you because why would you lie to me if I know that I can verify, and I could catch you off guard, so most people actually don't.
There's one thing that I really want to ask you about because I spent some time over the weekend looking at X account of Henrik. Please tell us about Henrik because that's an insane story. Would love to hear more.
Yeah, so I would say at the very basis, when you're building a startup in the compliance space, I think you have to be honest with yourself. Like this is one of the most boring industries possibly out there. Like no one wakes up every day thinking about, oh, I can't wait to go into my job and work in compliance. And if they do, I think there's probably something wrong with them. Um, but effectively, approaching from that perspective, like we know we're working the most boring space possible. The question became, how do we actually grab people's attention as we do marketing, as we go to market, as we try to get people, do growth, right? And part of that is like we try to be really creative around the way that we kind of run our organic media and organic socials. And if you look at legacy companies, most of them actually just doing the traditional playbook of like we're going to do webinars and lunch and learns and put out white papers and frankly that stuff I think puts you to sleep. So we had an interesting idea, which was like, what if you actually like poke fun at the space and poke fun at what's ridiculous about the space, which hopefully we can make a change in the future. But the fact that there are certain things that feel annoying to people and all that. So we came up with this idea of essentially coming up with a fictitious persona. This is a European venture capitalist by the name of Henrik, not a real person. We just completely made up that character, who essentially whose sole mission in life is to come out and try to regulate and try to like slow down progress. And so we created this Twitter account and we just started posting like these like satirical memes about over complying and over regulating. And I think it struck a nerve, and I think a lot of people, especially in the sort of European and American tech space, they kind of really resonated with the fact that the jokes that Henrik was making. So that account took off like wildfire. I think we launched the account roughly around 7 months ago, maybe 8 months ago. And in that short amount of time, I think we're sitting at almost 400,000 Twitter followers. And it's growing rapidly. So I think we're adding roughly like another 100,000 in less than a month or so. And now we're basically doing podcasts with industry leaders. So we actually scale the joke, and I won't, spoil too much of the fun, but we turn a meme into a real person. It's kind of what I'll say on the case. And now we're basically scaling that as far as we can go, right? So it's not just Twitter, it's now podcasts and media and video and basically seeing how far we can run it. And it has become I think not just a really fun project, but also a great source of our organic go-to-market and lead generation.
I think it's so interesting that you started with a fictitious persona and then found a real person who looks like the fictitious persona. I've never seen anything like that before. I also know that you tried experimenting with like a film crew following you everywhere. So how did that go? What were some of the learnings from that experience?
Yeah, I think what you see now with Henrik has actually been a lot of that team kind of like mutated into what's now the Henrik media team. So actually the same videographer that we hired initially is now kind of powering a lot of the media engine that we have on that side. But basically, I think the fundamental insight was, we live in the attention economy, right? And the more media you put out there, the more you tell your story, the more chances you have for customers to discover you, for investors to discover you. So we want to invest that really early. And we also, I think, had a sense of, I think what we're doing is unique in the sense that, we're building a startup, and I don't think enough people document that journey from the perspective of having someone, behind your shoulder, kind of like shooting you both in the good moments and the bad moments and helping tell the story of what it's like to build a company. We've been fortunate enough that we've been growing pretty aggressively. So actually, I think the story is more entertaining, and the fact that you're not just sitting in your computer, like banging your head against the screen, wondering why maybe you don't have customers or you're not growing fast enough. We had the opposite problem. So that's made for a really interesting, I think, piece of content. However, I think we had to prioritize in terms of should the team continue to focus on us or should they focus on Henrik? And the latest strategy there is just like double down on what's working, and Henrik has kind of again, taking the world by storm. So we're putting all our resources behind this viral thing.
I wanted to also ask you, because this is some of the recent news in the industry. There was a startup called Delve AI. They collapsed. Can you make it clear to the listeners, how are you different compared to a company like Delve?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think anyone that's in the compliance space that has gone through the process of trying to basically get one of these frameworks for themselves, like SOC 2 ISO. If you do any type of vendor research, you'll come across, both the standard players, but also kind of like new players like Delve. Unfortunately, there was some media that came out that basically, I think, accused them of practices that were not good. I can't comment on the specifics of kind of what they were accused on, but what I can say is, I think, going back to building trust, right? It's like we're completely open source. So anything that we claim that we can do, one of the advantages is that we can actually tell people, go and take a look, right? And if you have any concerns about the process, go and take a look. And everything is frankly open. So we've been very fortunate enough that with the whole Delve situation, they effectively kind of fell off, the map over the last, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks. We've been able to pick up a lot of the pieces because people kind of recognize that, trust is important, and we can actually, we'd rather choose a platform that's being transparent from the get-go and that's actually delivering on all the automation that is claimed, and we can prove that, and we don't have to just take them at their word. So we've been very lucky to find ourselves in a position where we can take advantage of that opportunity. I think it's extremely rare, just as a founder, that your main competitor essentially just like disappears and drives off a cliff. So we're very lucky. We're very busy, frankly, nowadays with all the new influx of business that's coming our way.
I also wonder, because you're making this process much faster compared to the traditional process. And I know what this means, like SOC 2 compliance, GDPR, all of that. I wonder, when you think about the space from the standpoint of a founder, how do you think this might impact, people whose job currently is, compliance, right? Some companies have like crazy compliance teams. How do you think this will evolve as a result?
Yeah, I think two things. I like to think about things from I guess we can talk about it from a customer perspective and the customer outcomes that we're delivering. And frankly, if you're any type of business and if you're a founder, the last thing you want is to spend unnecessary resources on things like compliance, right? You want to minimize the amount of money, the amount of time, the amount of effort that you're putting into these functions, while still being able to essentially guarantee a very high level of trust, a very high level of security, a very high level of adherence to whatever frameworks you claim to be basically compliant with. So we're essentially just making the process less of a headache, right, for a lot of these companies, both from startups to scale ups, and we're working to also like move upwards and into the enterprise. So I would say from a business perspective, we're getting a lot of positive response from being able to just enable them to reallocate those resources to things that are more value added than simply, pushing paperwork. I think the other perspective is from a human perspective. If you have been working in one of these fields, if you have been employed by one of these companies and working on essentially managing the compliance operations, quite frankly, I don't think it's a very glamorous thing to be doing, to essentially just be doing paperwork all day. It's not the most fulfilling type of work for people to be doing. So I think by automating the grunt work, we are enabling people to focus more on higher leverage work, on more kinds of creative activities. So this is resonating well for our customers, and talk to any startup founder that we've helped become compliant, and they're extremely grateful about how we took the headache off of their hands, and we enabled them to stay focused on innovating and creating great products instead of spending time basically trying to understand regulatory frameworks.
You have experience with launching companies in the AI space. This is not your first company. It's so interesting because you've been through all those different eras of AI. Initially, it was just kind of basic prompting. Now we have AI agents who can run different workflows and be deeply embedded in the process. So I wonder, how do you leverage AI in your processes on a day-to-day, in the way you do work? If you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think if you ask me a question, this question today versus 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks before, or 2 weeks into the future, I'll probably give you a very different answer simply because of how fast things are moving, right? So the things that I'm using AI for today are probably very different than what it was, 2, 3 months ago. But frankly, I think we're very AI centric in the sense that I think all three of us kind of co-founders are first and foremost technical. So it allows us to really tap into models even before they become polished consumer products or polished, non-technical products that you have that kind of interface. So because of this nature, I think we tend to look at the models from a raw capability. As soon as something drops, we grab it, and then we immediately start experimenting with what is possible, at the edge of, innovation, at the edge of technology. So today, I actually think it's possible to automate a significant amount of functions within the company, and to the point that we've actually changed our hiring plan significantly. This might be somewhat controversial, but essentially looking at functions like, for example, if you look at a function like sales, right, which we just started actually hiring more on the sales side, which is the interesting kind of counterpoint. We're now looking at it purely from the perspective of what do you actually require a human to do, and everything else we try to automate. So unless we have a really good first principles fundamental reason for why AI can't do this, that will be the only reason we hire a person. Otherwise, we will try to automate it and get our hands dirty and code it ourselves. So in our sales team, to give you a perspective, we saw an expensive product. You're talking about, 5-figure yearly contracts. You basically come in, you're not going to just put your credit card and buy something like this without speaking to someone. So typically a demo is important, right? You want to build a relationship. You want to be able to trust someone. So for that, you need humans. You still need humans to hop on a call and inspire trust and answer questions. I think at some point we're probably going to have models that can show up to calls and, look no different than the way you and I look in this conversation, and you won't be able to tell the difference. I think until then, if there is a capability gap, we still need humans in those roles. So we're continuing to hire for these like human specific goals that are more relationship based. Whereas everything else that a salesperson does, we've actually built in a lot of internal software and internal custom automations to automate everything. So I'm talking before you get on a call, the AI already research who you're talking to. During the call, it can actually surface insights to you to help you do a better job of doing the conversation. After the call, it can actually understand what was asked during the call. Do we need to send a follow-up email? What should that follow-up email contain? I need to send them a quote. How much is the quote? All that can be fully automated because we can listen to the transcript. We can make sense of the conversation using LLMs. And for a lot of this, I would say the perfect product does not exist. What I mean by that is a lot of these workflows are very custom to our process as a company, and they're constantly changing as we discover and want to experiment with new ways of doing things. So I actually believe it's really hard for non-technical companies to do this for their sales organization unless they hire engineers, and also creative engineers, so almost like maybe former founders type of roles, and embed them within sales organizations. That's a long-winded way of basically telling you kind of one of our core theses, which is the new way that we're starting to build teams is effectively hiring 2 people within every function. It's one subject matter expert and one engineer. And you pair those 2 people, let's say a salesperson engineer, a growth marketer and an engineer, let's say a partnerships lead and an engineer, and then having them work together to basically understand the core function, but also being able to automate it with LLMs really, really fast in a custom and bespoke way right away. So I do believe like you'll start to see more companies like that basically mix both the knowledge with the execution, as opposed to just scaling linearly. Let's just add more salespeople. Let's just add more, marketers. I think you can actually automate a lot more than what people think is possible today.
So are you saying that, for example, at CompAI, you'd have a salesperson working together with an engineer trying to automate a part of the typical sales process, for example?
Yeah, every day that's taking place.
So right now, this is pretty much engineers who are building all of these workflows. But for example, the salesperson would tell them what's needed, and then they would help execute on that.
Correct. We have engineers specifically assigned to the sales team, and that's all they work on. They do not work on product. They do not get distracted with bugs or anything else. They've never touched the main product code base. Their only job is specifically to automate as much as the salesperson needs so that they can focus more on the things that are exclusively human, which in our case right now is relationship building and, again, helping deliver these demos.
What I've seen out there is non-technical people trying to use AI to automate, but then they run into roadblocks because they are not technical enough to do it well. So what you're saying could become a go-to model for many companies in the age of AI.
Yeah, and I think we've arrived at this somewhat organically in that sense. Like, again, we're all technical in terms of like the co-founding team. We're all tinkerers. So every time we approach a new problem, we try to basically first solve it with technology, for better or worse.
Yeah.
That's not always the best idea, but nonetheless, that's our initial intuition is like, can I automate this? And then I move on to actually doing it by hand if I need to. So I think we've almost like embedded our DNA into everything that we do as a company. And I think the model has continued to shift, right? As you pointed earlier, we started building an AI in a place where the models weren't that capable yet, and the technology was a lot earlier. So we've gotten to see the transition between some of these things are not possible, and now they become possible. So I think we've had to reshape our teams, frankly, as the technology has evolved. And I think the more that organizations can find technologists that are finally attuned to what's possible, at the edge of the capability, and then embed them in teams so that they actually have access to that level of sort of like deep technical insight, you know, on the ground, right, in the sales ground or in the marketing ground. I think that's a great formula for success. So I know it's a common kind of statement that you hear nowadays, but like we're in the era of like the one-person billion-dollar company. I think that's very true. I mean, you can still employ 20 people, right? But now you're talking about, hey, can we have a $20 billion company with 20 people? So you can do the math and you can kind of scale it as far as you want to go. But I definitely think that's absolutely true. And obviously we are, maybe not to that degree yet, but we are somewhat an example of that, where we are servicing today 700 customers, and we only have a team of 17 as of this morning. And we actually just hired a few of them. So the 700 was actually being serviced by 14 people at one point in time. So that should tell you about like the level of support, sales, engineering, marketing, all of that included in that package.
How is your team structured right now, and how would you imagine the structure to be changing? Because back to your point regarding like the engineer to, for example, person ratio, I'm curious, what is the structure right now, and how do you imagine it to evolve from there?
Yeah, I think there's two questions. One is in terms of like raw headcount, and two is in terms of like distribution and current allocation across different teams. I'll speak about the first one, and then I'll dive into your point. Specifically on headcount, I think one of the biggest mistakes that most founders and most companies make is assume that, well, because we can automate things, now we need less people. I actually challenge that and actually think like if you can actually do things much more efficiently, rather than reducing your whole expense, you should increase your ambitions. You should go for much bigger goals and figure out what the limit of what you can afford is. So in our case, I think part of our mission and part of what we're driving towards is, instead of just going after, the compliance space, which in the past, you're a founder, you raise money, you're basically asking the question of what market are you going after? And if you start saying this thing around like, oh, I'm going to go after X, Y, and Z problems, that's too much. What investors want to hear and what's common sense in the Valley is like, you're going after one problem, you're going to be the best at solving that problem. And I think those rules are being rewritten as we speak, where you can now actually, because the cost of software is going down dramatically, you can go after bigger goals with the same amount of resources. Meaning, instead of going after a single multi-billion-dollar market, I can go after multiple markets. I can actually build adjacent products that feed off of each other. And I can still afford to do that, whereas in the past it would require hundreds of engineers to accomplish that. So I think the way we're looking at headcount is from that perspective of, great, we have X amount of resources. We will continue to hire because we're going to try to push it to see like how far can we scale our leverage, and we're going to just pick harder and bigger goals to go after a bigger chunk of actually multiple industries. So in our case, it's I think we're moving more from compliance to just cybersecurity as a whole, which is a multi-trillion-dollar market. So really excited about that shift. Now back to your initial question, which is basically how are we distributed today within the company? The big irony of LLMs and AI is the first jobs to be kind of mostly automated was actually engineers, where the people actually building the models were the first ones whose jobs were at risk. So our engineering team is actually disproportionately small for our size of company. So we actually only have 3 engineers, even though we're technically an AI first tech company. And the reason for that is because they have insane amounts of leverage, right? So a single engineer can accomplish what dozens of engineers would accomplish before AI, if not more. So we're actually able to ship a lot of code. We don't have any issues with the amount of stuff that we ship. We ship really fast, but we don't need that many people. And then we have, I think, as of right now, maybe 5 or 6 salespeople. We have 3 customer success people. So as you can start to see, it's like a lot of it comes down to relationships, right? It's like, what are the human roles that are still required for people to have trust. So a customer success team still hops on calls with customers to try to still understand their issues. We automate as much as we can through Slack, don't get me wrong, but sometimes people still want to call, right? So you still want to be able to hop on a call, onboard them, walk them around the product, answer the questions in real time. And again, until that's automated, we're going to need to continue to scale in some capacity while still making them as efficient as possible with internal automations and back office automations that just operate silently behind the scenes.
You mentioned also that you're thinking of expanding into cybersecurity. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? What's next for CompAI? What's the vision for the future?
Yeah, I think historically, if you look at the compliance market, if you look at SOC 2, ISO, any of these frameworks, uh, part of what they aim to accomplish is effectively to give you a way to establish trust that you're processing data in a safe way, right? So you get SOC 2 compliant, ISO, you go to your prospect, you show them this piece of paper, you're like, look, I am compliant. Someone audited me and they actually confirmed that I have the right controls in place, that I have the right risk mitigations in place. Now you can trust me to give me your data. But this certificate or this paper that you get at the end, it's really just a point in time check, right? It's like it's an auditor coming into your company and checking every few months that you actually fulfilled what you said you would do. So we're talking about what happens within those 3 months. How do we know that you continue to be secure? Well, we actually don't know. We trust that you would be. So effectively, all these frameworks are essentially two things. They're point in time approximations that you're being secure, right? And so you have these random checkpoints every 3 months, every 6 months, whenever your audit occurs. Second of all, the depth of these frameworks, it's basically just a list of common sense things that your company should do. You should have longer than, a password, a character passwords. You should encrypt your hard drives. That's all great, but if you've built products before, you also understand like the amount of vulnerabilities that exist within your company are way more nuanced than simply encrypting your hard drive, right? So your API could be unauthenticated, there could be an exploit, things like that. So I think we're moving away as an industry from point in time and essentially proxy compliance to real-time cybersecurity. So what does that mean? Real-time cybersecurity effectively means you have armies of agents, billions of agents that are constantly stress testing everything about your product, everything about your business, everything about your people, and notifying you in real time if they discover any vulnerability. So that's what we're moving towards. And this simply wasn't possible before, frankly, because it was impractical. In order to do this real-time basically verification, you would need to employ thousands of humans. That's clearly impossible, if not prohibitively expensive. But now that we have agents that are able to automate the services piece, this capability is finally something that we can start looking forward to. So that's really what we're building towards, is moving beyond just point in time checks to continuous cybersecurity.
We are slowly nearing the end of this episode. So I wanted to ask you if there's a founder listening to this, someone with not much experience yet, right? But let's say they have an idea. Given your experience in launching ventures, what would you advise them?
I would say this, the single best decision I ever made was probably moving to Silicon Valley. And I know this is cliche, but I think it's true. But I'll add more color to that. I think for me, the most powerful thing that I experienced was seeing people around me that, first of all, know smarter than you are. And they're doing nothing different than you are for the most part. They're just sitting there on their laptops and talking to customers, and they have ideas. And we're able to see that. And eventually you see some of these actually take off from zero, become billion-dollar companies. And when you see that happening in front of you like 3 or 4 or 5 times, it kind of changes something in your head where it makes you finally, like, things click. Like, oh, that's how you go from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2. That's how you actually build valuable companies. So I think you can read as much as you can about it. You can watch movies. You can try to like embed yourself in startup culture. You can read books. You can watch courses. But for me, it was until that moment of having experienced it kind of in the flesh. There's just so much detail in just watching the human experience unfold in front of you that I think it kind of, first of all, it made me believe, and second of all, it just I could see the framework really clearly. This is how you do. This is how it works. And there's obviously like second order, benefits in terms of you now have a network, right? If you meet people your age that are doing the same thing, they might know investors. So when you need to fundraise, it's much easier to just call your friends and ask them for introductions instead of, I remember being younger and being in New York City or being in Miami and wanting to get investment and be like, who do I even call? It's like, I don't have the network for this stuff. So I think many things get easier. Ultimately, I will also say this. I think Silicon Valley wasn't for me long term. Right? I ended up moving away because I just felt like the pace and the lifestyle, it just wasn't where I wanted to spend, the rest of my career in. But those few years that I spent there, I spent 4 years in total, were absolutely formative. And I think I now get to take away the network. I get to take the knowledge and the experience with me, no matter where I go. So that would be my number one advice: is find your Silicon Valley, right? And you might not be able to go to the States if you're international, but find a cluster of people that are successful, that are doing technology. Find the highest concentration of that and put yourself in the middle of it. And I think then just trust the process. The rest will kind of just continue to unfold in front of you.
Claudio, thank you so much for today. It was really insightful to speak with you. This was Claudio Fuentes, the COO and co-founder at Comp.ai. Make sure to check out Comp.ai and stay tuned for the next episode. Thank
Thanks,
you,
Gabby.
Claudio.